Hello everyone, and welcome back to my series of tier lists for the various Fire Emblem games. If you're new to the channel, came around with the release of Unicorn Overlord, you may have missed some of these. This is something that I started doing while we were waiting for Unicorn Overlord to come out, wherein I've been ranking each Fire Emblem game, or at least each mainline Fire Emblem game, on its various different qualities. We've done story and gameplay tier lists thus far. This time, we're going to rank the visual presentation of each of the mainline Fire Emblem games. Now, notably, we're not talking exclusively about art design here, about the design of characters, or necessarily a game being judged on being old or not. The idea is more, how is the art direction overall design of the game going to make it appear to the casual player, right? What looks and feels the best just on its face. So once this is done, a little bit further down the line, we will do one final tier list to round it all out, ranking the best and the worst of every mainline game in the series. So, what do we have set up here? We have a standard S to D ranking with a few selections at the bottom here. Games that have been remade, i.e. Fire Emblems 1 through 3, I have slotted into their own remade section because I do believe firmly that the 3 remakes of those titles are the definitive ways to play them. We also, just because of the nature of this particular tier list, have a number of side games that I've just put in their own tier down there because we're not talking about them. That's not what we're here for. So, without any further ado, let us talk about Fire Emblem 1 Shadow Dragon. This is going to be a rough one right off the bat because famously, one of the worst things about this remake and about Fire Emblem 1 in general is that it is, all things considered, pretty ugly. That is probably going to be our first D tier, honestly. It's rough because I like the overall character designs in Shadow Dragon. Obviously, it's classic Fire Emblem. It's what made Fire Emblem Fire Emblem. And I love all of the updated sprites that they did for the actual character busts. They look really good. The issue is that the moment-to-moment gameplay looks terrible. And I don't know if this is just because of the limitations of the Nintendo DS, or if it's just that they didn't know what to do with this coming off of the GBA games, right? And how visually pleasing they are and still are. All of the sprites are so boring in combat. You've got blue sprites and you've got kind of reddish orangey sprites, and that's it. There's no uniqueness for any of the characters. Every single general looks the same. Every single paladin looks the same. There's no changing color palette whatsoever. And it's all just kind of soft and muted and blurry, and I hate it. Even though I love to play Shadow Dragon, and this is going to be the exact same set of criticisms for Mystery of the Emblem, unfortunately, but it's just so hard to do sometimes when the game is just so frustratingly painful to look at. It's rough. I won't go on it any longer than that. It's not great. It's not great at all. Now, we're swinging from one insane range of the spectrum to the other here with Echoes, Shadows of Valentia, otherwise known as Gaiden. This is S tier, and y'all should know that it's going to be S tier. Gaiden is such a beautiful game. And again, like, it helps so much that it was on the 3DS as opposed to the DS, of course, because the 3DS has a lot more power. But just the nature of the animations made me realize what 3D animation could be in Fire Emblem. Like, you look at things like Engage, and you can draw a connection back to Shadows of Valentia to see just how nice these animations can be in a Fire Emblem game, especially compared to how static some of them have been in the series history. Combine that with how beautiful the art is, how nice the world map is, how great there's little visual flourishes everywhere, from the backgrounds of towns to the details on NPCs to even just the way that they did character expressions on sprites. These, tiny, still blurry, low-res 3DS sprites, but you could still see the emotion. You could feel the impact of everything going on. Shadows of Valentia is an incredibly impactful game from a visual standpoint, and I will always stand by it as being one of the most beautiful visually Fire Emblem games to exist. It has continued to age well, in my personal opinion. Really, the only drawback that I can give it is the fact that we fell back from the quality of the cutscenes in Fates to a much choppier, kind of weird low frame rate look for the cutscenes. I don't know why that is. the actual art style of them is still really good. Like, they're well choreographed, but there's this low frame rate thing going on that's weird. But that does not knock it out of S tier for me. Echoes is beautiful. Now, going on to New Mystery of the Emblem. I have to give this just a little bit of a bump, and the main reason that I have to give this a bump over Shadow Dragon is just I feel like there was a little bit more care that was put into making the feel of the game a little bit more appealing. It's based obviously in the same engine as Shadow Dragon. It looks nearly identical to Shadow Dragon, but I remember when I first played New Mystery after playing Shadow Dragon years prior, because it took me a long time to actually get my hands on it, because, you know, it never came out in the West and yada, yada, yada. I liked it more. It was less visually painful than Shadow Dragon, and I've gone back and played both again in recent years, and that is still the feeling that I have on it. So whatever there is about it, just like the sprites felt a little bit more lifelike, the maps were a little bit more pleasing to the eye. It's still not great. It's still going to be one of the worst in the series, but it did get better. Has all the same issues as Shadow Dragon. It's just a little bit more refined, which is nice. Genealogy of the Holy War. This is a tough one because I feel like it has really not aged well. And even compared to other Super Nintendo titles of the time that do look so much nicer and have aged well, I feel like Genealogy is in a rough spot. Genealogy is a phenomenal game, of course. Like, this is not a rating of the game itself in terms of its quality, just the way it looks, and it's not great. I think I have to put this in C tier as well. It is a rough game to look at. It has its charms, but the animations are goofy. The sprites don't look super great. The character busts don't look super great. There's a ton of reused character busts that make it really hard at a glance to keep track of, like, what characters you're dealing with, because it's like, I swear to God, I've killed the same guy like 5 times. It's because they all have the same face, but with slightly different color palettes. It's just not great. The maps can be very samey looking as you scroll across them. It's just not the best. And I say that with confidence because we're going to talk about, you know, Thracia 776 next, the next of the, and well, actually the only other Super Nintendo title in the series. And it just looks a lot better. So it can be pretty jarring going from Genealogy to 776, especially if you play one of the recommended ways of doing Gen 1 of Genealogy, then doing Thracia, and then doing Gen 2, seeing as how Thracia does sit in that gap. So it can be really weird. It can be really, really weird to jump back and forth. So yeah, solidly C tier for Genealogy. Compared to a lot of the Fire Emblem games, it really does not have the flair that I feel like it could. Now, Thracia, much better. It's not going to be A tier, but it's definitely B tier. Thracia is a game that I enjoy seeing in action. It looks a lot nicer. They clearly learned a lot from making Genealogy on the Super Nintendo and refined on pretty much everything when it came to Thracia. I like the animations a lot more. I like the character busts a lot more. The maps are much more appealing. There's just a lot more going on that makes it so much more fun to see in action, and I adore that about it. Is it still a dated game? Sure. It's a Super Nintendo game, and it has not aged as well as some Super Nintendo games. Like, as an example, any of the Mario games, including the Super Mario RPG, like, those are timeless, and they will always look good. Not quite the case for even Thracia, but it definitely is a lot better than Genealogy. Now, moving on to the most beloved era of Fire Emblem, and I think the thing that people think of when in terms of how good Fire Emblem can look, even with limited resources, it's the GBA run, starting with Fire Emblem 6, the Binding Blade. Now, this one might get me into hot water, but don't worry, it's not going to be the case for the other 2 GBA games. I'm not actually a huge fan of the way that Sealed Sword looks, or that Binding Blade looks, depending on translation things. Partially because I started with the last game in the trilogy of Sacred Stones, which looks phenomenal, and then went and played Fire Emblem 7, Blazing Blade, which also looks great, and then played Sealed Sword, Binding Blade, and it does not look as good. You can tell that the devs really learned how to use everything that GBA had to offer as they made these 3 games, and it was not great to start. Some of the character sprites definitely are very limited and did not age as well. I'm thinking of things like the Cavaliers when you compare them to other newer classes and sprites in some of the latter games. The maps were just a lot more bland and monotone in their color design. The character busts are good, but they definitely got more detailed, more varied, had better shading as time went on. It's not bad by any means. It is solidly B tier. But God, it just gets so much better as you play the GBA games, and it's certainly better than a lot of the other games in the series, don't get me wrong. But yeah, it's rough sometimes to look at. So, solidly B tier for, well, I guess Binding Blade. There you go. Now, Blazing Blade, however, this is an A tier, and our first A tier. Fire Emblem 7 has aged so well. There's a reason that so many fan mods use it. They look so good in the process. This set the bar for visual quality in Fire Emblem, unlike any other game that came prior to it. It looks great. All of the character busts look awesome. The character sprites all look better. The maps are infinitely more interesting looking with far better color gradients and shading and everything. It's just a nicer looking game. I love the towns in Fire Emblem 7. I love all of the different sprites, the different varieties of colors, the wider range of color schemes that you had for different characters. Slight little modifications, flourishes for different animations for the special classes. Like, you think of Fire Emblem, and you think of that absolutely sick crit animation with the Soul Katai that Lyn has when she's promoted, right? Like, how insane. You can even see, like, there was a little bit of, like, body physics and everything when she lands on a GBA sprite. Like, they did so much with this game to make it look as nice as possible, and they still managed to improve it even more for Sacred Stones, which we're going to talk about here in a second. But yeah, Fire Emblem 7, beautiful game, has aged perfectly. I think will be a timeless classic visually for the entire history of gaming. It's phenomenal. Chef's kiss. The only reason it's not an S tier is because Sacred Stones is clearly superior to it, and guess where Sacred Stones is going? S tier for Sacred Stones. God, this might be the prettiest Game Boy Advance game that I've ever played. Every single time I boot up Sacred Stones, every time I see someone playing it, I am just floored by the sprite work in this game. The beauty and richness of colors, slightly more muted than the more bright cartoony colors of FE6 and 7, but still bright and vibrant and very Fire Emblem. It feels just grounded enough while still having that anime aura to it. That is a perfect blending. Every single map is beautiful. All of the character busts are incredibly detailed. All the new class sprites and animations, oh my god! Like, the fact that they took General from Fire Emblem 6 and 7 and updated it with that sick-ass Claymore animation that it would never have had before, because it was the first time the generals could wield all three weapon types, swords, axes, and lances, was in Sacred Stones. They had to make a new animation for it, and it is so tight. Like, God, Sword General Amelia is my favorite damn thing in the series, other than Ross and just being the most insane berserker ever. But just, it all looks so good. All of the menus are more detailed. All of the item sprites are so beautiful. It's just a phenomenal entry. It's one of the best looking games in the series. There's not much else I can say about it. It's just S tier. Now, unfortunately, we're going to be dropping down a little bit here in terms of visual quality for a little while. Then we're going to jump right back up. It is Fire Emblem Path of Radiance FE9. There are some aspects of Path of Radiance that are really, really nice. The character busts, beautiful. The sprites and animations, limited. Very limited. It seems to be a reoccurring trend with intelligent systems until we get to the era of the 3DS, that it takes them a while to hit their stride when they're dealing with new hardware, and you can definitely feel that with Path of Radiance. Like, going back to consoles for the first time, having a lot more tools at their disposal in terms of visual design, it was clearly a struggle for them. Like, it's such a weird mix of the art, like the CG backgrounds, the character busts, beautiful, but then, man, the maps are kind of rough, and man, the character animations are pretty rough. The map sprites pretty limited. Like, they did a lot of cool stuff, but it is solidly... It's solidly C tier. It has to be. I was going to say B originally, but it just doesn't feel right. It has to go in C tier. It is one of the more rough games to play. Even though it is one of the best games in the series, I would not be surprised if there was people today who would go back to try and play it and struggle a bit with the visual noise that Path of Radiance brings to the table. Now, You push through that, though, absolutely phenomenal game, and the nice thing is when you then make the leap to the sequel in Radiant Dawn, oh, it looks so much nicer. I love Radiant Dawn. We'll talk about that next. Radiant Dawn is a very solid A tier, and I know that might be one that people kind of take some issue with, but I mean, going from Path of Radiance to Radiant Dawn, how much more lifelike the animations are, how much more detailed the character busts are, the maps are beautiful comparatively, all of the intricate design of all of the menus, hell, the start screen. If you've seen the start screen of Radiant Dawn compared to Path of Radiance, oh my lord. And the cutscenes as well. I didn't talk about the couple of cutscenes that we have in Path of Radiance. Not great. Definitely, like, they're okay, but you can tell they're limited. Radiant Dawn, though, the scene of rescuing Lucia from the gallows when the Grail mercenaries come in is still one of my favorite cutscenes in any Fire Emblem game. It's just so dynamic and fun and intense. I love Radiant Dawn. Its art direction is amazing. All of the designs are incredible. It's phenomenal. Like, it's still limited, and it is going to be a game that does not age as gracefully due to the limitations of the Wii, and that's why I can't put it in S tier. But it is still a phenomenal visual experience for anyone who wants to go back and play some of the older Fire Emblem games who maybe got in with the new series, as we would like to call it in the community. Speaking of which, let's talk about that new series, starting with Fire Emblem Awakening. This is where it's going to get tough, because Fire Emblem games of the last over 10 years now all look phenomenal. Like, they have such great visual fidelity in so many different ways. Some of them have their limitations, we'll talk about that, but these games look awesome, and Awakening is awesome. It is not going to be S tier, because we saw limitations with the character sprites. Everyone knows the hooves, as we can think of them, with the weird no feet thing that Awakening has going on with its character sprites. But I mean, the art, beautiful. All of the maps, beautiful. The character sprites themselves, in terms of detail, phenomenal. The cutscenes, oh my god. Everything about Awakening looks so good, beyond just like the kind of silly, stumpy character feats, and some of the animations were a little limited, but we saw that got fixed very quickly on the 3DS. So yeah, I mean, Awakening just looks great. It doesn't hit the same highs as Echoes did. Echoes, of course, being the last game that came out on the 3DS. IS really knew how to draw the power out of that console by that point. But yeah, Awakening was great. It is a very, very solid A tier. I love it, and I always love to see it. Now, Fates. Fates is S tier, and we'll put them all up there because they all look the same. Fates has everything going for it. All of the character designs are amazing. All of the cutscenes are beautiful. The variety of designs for all of the maps are stunning. I can picture all of them clearly to this day. The sheer breadth of classes that have such unique designs with all of their promotions, the difference in styles between Hoshido and Nor, like some of the insane effects when you get to Revelations and you wind up going to Vala, like, God, man, Fates looks incredible. It still has limited 3DS face going on that didn't really get to its max stride until Echoes, but I can't hold that against it. Fates, just one of the most beautiful Fire Emblem games around. I love it to death, and I think it's going to age very, very gracefully. It's hard to say, since obviously the 3DS is not nearly as far out as something like the Game Boy Advance, but these games look really, really nice, and I expect that it's going to stay that way as we get into the future. Now, Three Houses, this is a tough one, because, like, there's some things that are so amazing about Three Houses visually, and then there's some things that are so rough. Like, everyone can imagine the really nasty texture mapping of Garreg Mach, where you could literally see the corners fused together in super low-res, horrifying, poor detail. Like, some of the really bad low-res texture work on some of the actual sprites when you would see them up close. Like, there was some rough stuff in Three Houses. However, you get to the flip side of things, and that's where you have stuff like the incredible cutscenes, the awesome character designs, like how visually striking the three different houses were, how great the different student uniforms were. Like, there's a ton of great stuff going on, but then you hit the flip side again, and it's like how kind of colorless and lifeless a lot of the maps were. It's such a mixed bag visually. And again, it's the first time that Intelligent Systems was really working in any capacity, and granted they had a lot of help from Koei Tecmo, but on a new system, and they didn't really have the understanding of how that system could be utilized to its full effect in terms of the Switch. So, yeah, Three Houses is rough. I think, despite everything that I love about it, being able to compare it to Engage, it probably sits squarely in B. It's not bad, but it has its drawbacks. It's pretty nasty in a few cases that we have mentioned here. Now, finally, we have Engage, and this is going to be one that's so weird because I've railed on the design of Engage and like the designs of the characters so much. But this is why at the start I wanted to specify that it's not just like designs that we're talking about here. It's the overall visual experience. And Engage actually does do a really good job of that, despite my issue with so many of the designs. Because you can, again, compare to Three Houses to Engage, and you can see the improvements. The resolution of everything is so much better. The quality on all of the textures, so much better. It looks beautiful in motion. The animations have so much life and vitality to them. There's so much variety going on with all of the different attacks, all of the different crit animations, all of the emblem attacks and effects, the different outfits for all the emblems. Like, there's so much design work going on there that looks so good, especially with the blending of colors, with like a character's color palette that they then have to switch up for every different emblem that they can engage with. Like, it's just so insane. All of the generic units designs are so good. The world map looks so much better. The visual quality of the Somniel is so good. Like, it is actually a very pretty game. Design foibles aside, Engage looks really, really nice in motion, especially when we know how difficult it can be to make a game look good on the Switch. We're looking at you, Pokemon games. Like, you look at Engage and you look at like Legends Arceus next to each other, and you would think they were from two completely different consoles. It's insane. So yeah, Engage, I have to put it up in S tier. I have to. Like, even despite my issues with some of the designs, it is a pretty game. And I think it's going to stay pretty for a very, very long time. In ways that Three Houses, its rough edges are only going to get more rough with time. I don't think Engage is going to have that problem. It is a beautiful, beautiful game. And with that, we have gone through the visual quality tier list for every mainline Fire Emblem game. Let me know your thoughts, as always, on my placement for all these games in the comments down below. I'll be happy to have discussions with all of you. What do you think should have been moved up? What do you think should have been moved down? And what do you think is in the exact right spot? Give me all of your thoughts on that. I'm curious to see what y'all have to say. Once again, my name has been Tom, otherwise known as Titanium Legman. Look for the overall tier list for quality for all of the Fire Emblem games, the entire package coming down the line. That one's going to be a very fun one to do. But until then, thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all have a good night. Stay safe and healthy out there. And remember, be good to each other. Bye now.